What's up, Grandmaster Igor Smirnov is here, and today I'd like to share with you a game between Magnus Carlsen, who's playing white, versus another Grandmaster, Burmakin. What is interesting about this game? One of the most common questions that people ask me is how to convert your advantage into a full point. Such as in this position. We can see that white has an extra pawn on e5, and at the very same time it's totally unclear how can white possibly convert this into victory. And also one more of the very common questions that people ask me is, what should you do when there is no attack, when you cannot attack opponent's king? Because obviously we would wish to attack opponent's king, but very often you simply have no way of doing that. And this is exactly a situation like that. So what should you do in this case? Let's see how Carlsen addressed the very same problem. First of all, he played a really tricky move. Bishop goes to e2. And at first it may seem like a blunder, and maybe even black thought that white simply blundered a pawn, because black can answer rook goes to e4, and using advantage of the pin along the e-file, he can then grab that pawn on e5 on the next move. Why did Carlsen play that move, bishop goes to e2? It is because obviously he wanted to improve the position of the bishop, which previously was totally passive back there on f1, and now he wants to transfer it to the f3, to a much more active square, where it will take aim at the black's weak pawn on c6. And that is the reason why Carlsen was willing even to sacrifice that pawn on e5 in order to activate his bishop, because activity of your pieces is the dominant factor, is the most important factor of a chess game. Alright, let's see what happened next. Black replied rook to e4, white played king to f2 to protect the rook and enable the bishop to go on f3 on the next move. Black captured the pawn, white played bishop to f3, and rooks were traded, and black played bishop to d7. At this point, white kinda realized the first phase of his plan. He activated the bishop, but still it is totally unclear what can white get out of this. Yes, white attacked the pawn on c6, but black protected it very well by his bishop, and the material balance is equal, and there is similarly no way for white to improve his position whatsoever. Well, he can bring his king forwards, but black can't do the same, and it looks like a totally equal position. And again, the most important question here is, what should white even aim for? What is his plan? And here is the major piece of advice here. When it's an endgame, your major plan is to promote your pawn into a queen. And even though you cannot do it immediately, there are also two other things that you can do prior to that, which are, the first thing is to advance your pawns forward, therefore making it easier for them to be promoted in the future because you make them closer to the 8th rank. And the second thing that you can do is to attack opponent's weak pawns, because you need to, like ideally speaking, let's say win that pawn so that it is not there, and then after that you can push your c pawn forward and to promote it into a queen, or at least to force your opponent to give up his bishop to stop that pawn from promotion. Once again, these are the two major things that you should do in literally any end game. Push your pawns forward, attack opponent's weak pawns. Just knowing this one piece of advice already makes you stronger than 90% of the opponents that you face, because they usually have very few ideas about what to do in an endgame. And by the way, let me also mention that if you're interested in improving at chess, becoming a master, let's say a national master or international master, you can take advantage of the current Cyber Monday offer that we're running. This is a 60% discount on any course that we have, and we have a lot of them that can help you to improve at virtually every aspect of a chess game. And yeah, in general, I'm super thankful for the modern era that we live in and for the modern technologies that allowed me to connect with millions of people around the world and hopefully to help them improve at chess. And therefore I wanted to celebrate this Cyber Monday occasion, and we're providing this massive discount, but just for 2 days. So if you're interested, it's better for you to go and check this out right now. Alright, let's continue with the game. So first thing is fairly clear. Carlsen just wants to bring his king closer to the center, and black is doing the same thing. And now black plays pawn to h6, which is a wise thing to do. We know that in general, if you have a bishop which is going on light squares, it's better to place your pawns on black squares so that they do not restrict an activity of your bishop. And one more reason for black for doing that is that if black places his pawns onto dark squares, such as h6, and he can also push his g pawn to g5, then the white's bishop will have no way of attacking those pawns because they are simply placed on another color. White is doing the same thing. Pawn to h4, removing his pawn from the light square, putting it into the dark square. Black goes g5. So currently both players are following the same strategy. And at this point, once again, it looks like, okay, nothing really happened. How can white make any progress? But let's keep watching. Firstly, Carlsen plays bishop to e4. And even though it's more of a waiting move, but it's also a great technique actually. In an endgame, if you are active, if you want to win but you're not sure what to do, it makes sense to wait. Because of the few reasons. First of all, it just makes your opponent a little bit tired, a little bit confused, because he's also not sure what to do. The second reason is that sometimes your opponent will just make some mistake by himself or by herself, because very often people get tired of waiting, they're trying to go forward and do something active, and by going forward they can possibly weaken their position so that you can take advantage of this later on. And that's partially the reason why Carlsen is playing bishop e4. He's not in a hurry, he just wants to play on and wait for the chance to do something more active. Black goes bishop e8, he's also just waiting, he thinks that probably the position is totally drawish and there is nothing for him to worry about. Carlsen plays g3, this thing we already discussed just a move ago. If you have a light squared bishop, it makes sense to place your pawns on dark squares, and currently Carlsen made it perfectly. So he has a light squared bishop and all of his pawns are on dark squares. Black just keeps waiting, bishop d7, bishop g2, bishop e8, and bishop h3. So here Carlsen tries already one potentially, aggressive idea. He wants to move his bishop to c8 and attack that weak pawn on a6. Remember, we talked about this a few minutes ago, that one of the plans that you can realize in an endgame is to attack opponent's weak pawns, and that pawn on a6 is particularly weak. It is not protected by any other pawn. But black player was also a tricky guy and he played bishop f7. He's, kind of even inviting white to execute his idea. It looks like he's maybe blundered this bishop c8 idea or something like that. But in fact, it's not the case. He prepared a clever trick. If white goes bishop c8, black replies with bishop to e6, attacking the white's bishop. And now after bishop takes the a6 pawn, black just plays bishop d7 and he's closing the cage for the white's bishop. If you take a look at this piece, you can see that there is no way out for the bishop. It can go to bishop b7 or maybe a8, but that is it. It cannot go out, and therefore at this point there is just no way for white to do anything, and it will be a dead draw. Therefore we have to give credit to the black player, who was also really resourceful here. Now let's come back to the actual game. But Carlsen realized that he shouldn't go into this line, and so he didn't play that move bishop to c8, which, as we already know, did not work for white here. So instead he just said, okay, let's keep playing. And he played bishop g2, putting the bishop backward, attacking that weak pawn on c6 once again. Black plays bishop e8 and bishop e4 and bishop d7. So it is once again the same position that we saw a couple moves ago, but nevertheless you can see that Carlsen is not in a rush, he's just trying different things to do. Once again, what else can you possibly play here? We said that there are only two things that you can possibly do. The first thing is to attack opponent's weak pawns, and the second thing is to advance your pawns. These are the two major plans for an endgame. And currently Carlsen tried the first thing, attacking opponent's weak pawns. It didn't work, and therefore he transitions to the second thing, which is advancing your pawns. He plays bishop to c2, aiming to push his a pawn forward. Now, you may wonder what's the point for white of doing so, but we'll see that in just a moment. Black plays bishop f5. He wants to offer an exchange of bishops, and white shouldn't do this. He has a good bishop which can attack black's weak pawns, so he just plays bishop d1, bishop e6. And here Carlsen played bishop to f3. He actually could have played pawn to a4 immediately, but he's still not in a hurry. He still wants to keep harassing black with different threats. And then after a couple more maneuvers, he finally played pawn to a4. Black plays bishop f3, and now pawn goes to a5. And at first it may seem like, okay, but what's the point? Okay, the pawn is now on a5, not on a3, but it doesn't make any difference. But it's not exactly true. The whole point of moving your pawns forward in an endgame is that you make them closer to the square of promotion. And therefore, in the future, if you have a chance to start pushing this pawn forward, it'll be a much more realistic chance for this pawn to be promoted on the a8 square from a5 compared to the situation when it was just an a3. And again, in a moment, we'll see how it worked out in a real game. And now, once the white's pawn became closer to the 8th rank, it is now on a5. The white's plan right now would be to transfer his bishop onto c8 and to grab that pawn on a6. And therefore, what white needs to do is to transfer his bishop to this diagonal, h3 to c8, and from there to attack the pawn. And because of that, the major defensive resource that black should have used here was to push his g-pawn forward and just to lock this diagonal. And if black would play pawn to g4, it would allow him to keep the position equal and to save the game. So that is still a draw. However, black did not realize that anything really changed, and he thought that it's just a dead draw, so he just played bishop to h1. He's still waiting, thinking that there's nothing white can do. You can see that an endgame is a really tricky phase of game. A lot of players do not really understand what's going on here, even grandmasters, So here Carlsen played bishop d3, bishop g2, and Carlsen played, by the way, bishop d3 is also a very, very interesting move played by Carlsen. In a moment we'll see why. And here he pushes his pawn to g4. The purpose of this is to land his bishop to the f5 square, where it's currently protected by the pawn. From there it can go to c8 and finally capture that a6 pawn. Therefore, currently white is really going to win the pawn and later on the game. And here's a very, very interesting thing about this. If black tries the same defensive trick that we discussed in the past, if he tries to play bishop d5, with the idea that if white tries bishop f5, his plan, black just goes bishop e6 and closes this diagonal. And, that would be a draw. But in this position, instead of going bishop f5, there is another thing that white can do. Let me ask you, what is it? Think about this for a couple of seconds, if you can find the winning move for white here. And if you can, write it down in comments below. I'll give you one more second. And the winning move is an amazing shocker, bishop takes b5. You don't usually expect, the only piece that you have to be sacrificed, but that is exactly the case. So what's the purpose of this? Clearly black cannot recapture by the c pawn, because in this case the bishop will be lost. So that is simple. But what if black recaptures by the a pawn? In this case, the white's pawn from a5 simply goes forward, pawn goes to a6, and there is no way for black to stop this pawn from being promoted. By the way, right here we can already see a big difference with this pawn being situated on the a5 rather than a3. Obviously, if the white's pawn is still on a3, this whole idea would not work, and now it makes white to win the game. This line did not happen in the actual game, the line which we just analyzed, bishop d5, and black just played bishop to f3. He keeps waiting, white plays bishop f5, and now white just realizes his plan. Basically, the bishop wants to go to c8, grab the pawn, and after that the a pawn will be promoted. And black is already losing. He's trying to bring his king somewhere closer to the queen side to maybe stop the white's pawn there, but now the white's king can go forward, king goes e5, bishop e2, bishop goes to c8, attacking the pawn, king d8, bishop takes a6, winning that critical pawn. And even though black could also capture the pawn on g4, it doesn't really help him. White plays king to d6, and in this position black resigned, because white is taking one more pawn, and his major plan is very simple, is to play bishop b7 and then to push that pawn all the way forward to the 8th rank where it will be promoted. And because of this, black just resigned. To summarize what we have just learned, you can realize that, first of all, an endgame is definitely not a draw. You can still win it in case you know what's the winning plan. And the winning plan is usually to advance your pawns forward and to attack opponents' weak pawns. And if you just keep in mind this one thing, you will already be a better endgame player than the vast majority of your opponents. Let me also remind you once again that the Cyber Monday offer that we're running right now will expire in just 2 days, and by the time you watch this video, maybe it's only 1 day left. Therefore, if you're interested in improving your chess, click the link below this video and find some of our courses that already helped a lot of students to get better in chess. And I'm proud to say that we have thousands of success stories by now, and successful students who improved their rating by a few thousand rating points within just a few months, or they became state champions in the US. We got one a world chess champion in amateur division, and we had people becoming national masters, international masters, and the list goes on and on. And by the way, let me also mention that the vast majority of our students are actually adults, right? So let me debug that myth that only little kids can progress in chess. That's certainly not true. I can say this confidently now because I know all these stories of our students. And again, the majority of our students are actually adults. Therefore, if you're interested, click the link below the video and do check this out. Hopefully it will help you to get that significant progress in chess within the next few months. And let me also thank you for watching this video. Do let me know in the comments below if you enjoyed it, and also what are the next videos that you wish me to record about. I would love to know your opinion so that I can create new videos that you will truly enjoy. I hope that you'll have a great rest of your day, and I'll talk to you soon.